I have not been had the pleasure of playing the SF6 beta. But you know what beta has, or demo has come out? The demo for Warhammer 40k Warpforged. Wow! It feels like a total coincidence that I feel like I talked about it just only a couple episodes ago on the podcast about the Horus Heresy Legions, the other 40k digital card game battler from the same developer. Feels like very recently that I talked about it, but so the yeah, so the demo came out, I believe, on the third or the sixth. It came out like a couple days ago, basically. Um, so I just randomly logged into Horus Heresy Legions just to check what the current campaign event was, so I could just see. Oh, maybe I could just try out a new faction. And there was World Eaters. Not the biggest World Eaters fan myself, but I cleared the whole thing in like a 2-hour session. So really no need to make those things last 2 weeks, guys. Really no need. But it's beside the point. When I logged in, there was a little notification in like the mail, like on like the update section, that said, "Hey, go play the demo for Warpforged. It's out right now on Steam." I was like, "Oh, okay." So I just downloaded it in like 5 minutes. Checked it out. It is generally in its, at least in its very limited state. So I'll preface this if you're curious about checking out the demo. It's very limited. It is a demo. You have a practice mode against AI, and you have online, which does function. And I had a couple matches that were pretty smooth. Didn't have any disconnection issues. So at least that seems to work just fine. And I never ever had any disconnection issues or server problems with Legions, so it seems like at least their server infrastructure is pretty solid. Which is nice for a demo. I spent a lot more time in the practice mode, just because so essentially what is available in the demo is 2 factions. Space Marines, specifically Ultramarines, and Orcs. I'm not sure how they're going to be breaking down factions, if there's going to be different kinds of space, like, oh, are we going to get Salamanders as their own thing, or what, or who, not entirely sure how they're going to do it. The only ones that are playable right now are Ultramarines, and they seem to have like a very specific like Ultramarine flavored mechanics and aesthetic to all their like card borders and things like that. So yeah, it's them and the Orcs right now, and there's about 5 decks each that they have put together, that the devs have put together for you to try out. There's no deck building. You can't even really look. I don't even think you can actually look at the card list. But you can play them. You can see like how many. They have a breakdown of like the different costs of each card. Like you have this many 4 energy cards and stuff like that in this deck, for instance. But no actual ability to look at a card list, which they fine, whatever. I didn't really mind. Would have been nice just to check out kind of how they're designing it, but you can just see it in game. So, that is pretty much what is in the game right now. So, judging just off of that, it seems like Warpforged is taking a lot of the improvements that I kind of wanted out of Legions. So if you recall, I think Horus Heresy Legions is a really solid little digital card game, a little card battler. For being 40k Hearthstone, it's pretty good at being 40k Hearthstone. My biggest gripes were just with like the presentation, and yeah, really just the presentation. It definitely felt like a mobile game that was really, because it is a mobile game, that is really reaching for having something that looks very polished, and it's just not quite getting there. It looks fine, but excuse me, it's just not quite. And even though so many things about the game are cool, the different factions are differentiated so well in their gameplay. Like, they all feel really different. There's so much cool like flavor to the different mechanics and the way that they play. It's monetized pretty fairly. There's some really like fun, cool ideas for translating things from 40k into a card game. Really cool stuff, but just there's just a little bit of polish that just isn't quite there. Doesn't kill the game at all, but just like, man, if they just had more budget, basically, if they just had a little more budget, they could make something really, really neat. Warpforged, and again, I haven't seen the whole game, right? Because it's just a demo. Seems to have upped the production value just enough to be, oh, cool, this is like a, yeah, no, I see, this is where the money went. So like 3D backgrounds, and every match opens with a very, very short, like 2-second panning shot where it just zoom, or not a panning shot, but a zoom out from the background to the little card battlefield. It's like instant, basically. But you get to see, like, oh, it has a little bit of depth to it. It's not just like a 2D thing with a little bit of animation here and there and some like random effects, like little sparks maybe once in a while. Real 3D backgrounds. The cards themselves look really nice. It took me a little bit of getting used to, because there's like a visual language that I just had to get acquainted with. It didn't take too long, but it was a little like, okay, a little confusing. What it looks like they're doing is that every single faction has a totally different aesthetic for their card, like the card itself, like the borders, like all the aesthetics are different. So the Ultramarines, very sleek, like stone and steel. All of their units, like all their like troop units that you play, have they have like an extra. What would you call it? It's like a little arch in the card, like the card border, that denotes that it is a unit, like visually. So there's only really two types of cards, and same thing in Warpforge. There's basically just tactics, which are like your spells, and troops, which are the ones you play. They're the units you play. They've basically differentiated them visually by all of the units, all of your troops have some kind of thing at the top in the border, like the design of the card, that denotes that they are a troop. So the orcs have a little like teeth, like kind of squiggly, sharp tooth, little rah, rah, kind of thing at the top of their card borders for all their troops. And the tactics do not have that. As far as I could tell, they were just much more basic, just card rectangle. So all of them, as opposed, so in Legions, everything pretty much, I think they might have had like some different colors to denote different colors and like different icons and things like that, but generally like the actual structure of the card itself, visually, the design was pretty uniform across everything in Legions. In Warpforge, not so much. They've taken the extra step to make everything look different. I thought it was just going to be a thing with maybe the... I didn't think it was going to be as extreme. I thought it was just going to be a thing with the, like, warlords, like the leader characters on the field. But not so. Everything is very visually distinct, depending on the faction. So you basically get... Oh, yeah, another thing. So speaking of production value, a lot more voice acting this time. So in Legions, that was another thing I was like, oh, you compare this to like the quality of Hearthstone. Which, of course, is not fair, right? It's not a fair comparison to make, but it's the comparison that the consumer has to... It's a real comparison. Hearthstone is like voice acting on everything. Warpforge does not have voice acting on everything, but it has it on way more stuff than Legions did. Well, Legions pretty much just had it on Warlords, pretty much. And a couple sound effects and stuff like that. Like, it's sound, but sound effects, yeah. But in terms of getting actors in the booth, not so much. Warpforge has way more, and it's not every card, but it's a lot of them. At least I'm pretty sure it's not every card. There's way more, and it's like noticeable. Oh, okay, cool. You put down the Reaver unit, and he says a line about like striking. Who's the jetpack guy? Striking from the sky or whatever. Okay, cool. Nice. You put down some orc card just has the worst voice, which is totally appropriate for that. Just like that kind of a voice. And yeah. Which is, it's just a little touch. It's just a little level of polish that's like, oh, nice. It feels very active and dynamic with all these little voice lines. Not as many, like, effects as far as I could tell, like visual effects, but the voice things were really nice. And I liked it. So in that front, very good. In terms of gameplay, it's difficult to tell right now, again, because there's only 2 factions, and for the most part, each of those only have 1 or 2 mechanics that they really show off. The Ultramarines have one called Codex, which I think is new. I don't remember if it's from... In Legions, the Emperor's Children had... A lot of their cards had a mechanic called Perfection, which was where if you played that card and that card, like, expended all of your energy, so if you were, like, super energy efficient, it would trigger an effect. It would have a Perfection effect. Codex, for the Ultramarines, is like, oh, every time you spend all of your mana, it triggers an effect. So it's not like, it doesn't have to be that card itself. It just, you can have like a bunch of Codex troops on the field, and as soon as you spend like your last bit of energy, I think I said mana. I'll use those interchangeably because mana is much more common. I'll probably slip up like that. But when you do so, like all of those effects will trigger. Just one after the other. I think in play order. Or maybe from left to right. I'm not sure. I didn't check. It's not too important right now. So that seems like pretty flavored to... Oh, that's kind of like because Ultramarines are all about efficiency. Gilliman is all about efficiency and administration and being the world's best boss. So he wants everything to be as efficient as possible and as practical as possible. So, oh yeah, I guess it would make sense that Ultramarines would have a thing that rewarded you for being... You could build up these big combos of effects that can trigger every turn when you're the most energy efficient. So that's cool. Orcs, because they're like... Orcs are big swarmers. They have... it's called... I think it's literally called Swarm or Horde or something like that, where you play a card and you can keep playing that card up to a certain limit. It'll be like Horde 2, and you can play like 2 more versions of that card if you have the energy to spare. There's also actually there's a couple more orc ones actually. There was one I forget what it's called, but it triggers when a friendly unit makes a melee attack or something. There's another one where this was specifically like there was a mech focused deck, like where they had a lot of vehicle type troops. Vehicles are technically different. It was like the actual like things you play on the board. Troops, vehicles, and structures. So I think they're going to do the same thing here. Orcs have one where it's like, it gains a special effect if you have a vehicle in play or something like that. I forget exactly how it works. So they've got like already, and I had full faith that they were going to deliver on that, but like having unique mechanics that are flavored to the faction, that represent parts of the faction. Excuse me. Great. That's all you need to do. I might have even said this before, but like the thing about 40k games is that you don't have to like reinvent the wheel. If you want to be innovative and you think you can do it, sure, make something cool, but like all a 40k game needs to do is like take an existing idea or genre or model and make it 40k. Just add in and just adapt it to the 40k universe and add in all the cool races and factions and give them gameplay things that are representative of like their traits in the universe or in the tabletop game or something like that. And just give it enough flavor, and then the aesthetic, and as long as the core gameplay is solid, will totally carry it, and it'll be cool. So they did that really well with Legions. It was one of the things I had to like applaud them the most for. So I was very confident that they would do it, and it seems like they're on track to pull off the same kind of thing with Warpforge. In addition to that, Everguild. Everguild is the developer and publisher, actually. Basically like an indie game. In addition to that, there are a couple gameplay changes that are neat. So I guess I'll mention like a couple things that stayed the same. If you did check out Legions, there's a lot of returning types of mechanics, like literally the same type of mechanic, sometimes with the same name. So there were a couple that I remember, like Flank, which is a unit can attack immediately, but it can only attack minions and not the enemy warlord. Something like that. Same thing. Some of them have been renamed, but a lot of them are either function the same or literally the same name and function. So you'll feel just at home. One change, excuse me, one change that they made that I think is actually pretty neat that I haven't seen done in a different card game is they have every unit, every troop, I'll just call them units, every unit now has 2 different attack stats. So they have a melee and a ranged one, which I think is actually an effort to pull more from the actual tabletop game. So in 40k, the tabletop game, every single unit has a range stat, a shooting stat, and a melee stat, which is the weapon. Shooting and weapon is what it's called on the tabletop. And those are different, and certain units are balanced around the fact that they have more of one and less of the other, or they're balanced in both. For instance, infamously, the Tau are like the gods of ranged combat and completely fall apart once you get into melee range. Whereas something like the, Khorne Berserkers are like the exact opposite. So, they have, every unit now has a melee, a ranged, melee attack, ranged attack, and health and energy cost. So, excuse me. Instead of being like a 3-2 or something, 3 attack, 2 health. Now something can be like a 4-2-2 with like, oh, it's got really high, and it can cost for like 3 energy, and it's like, oh, it's got really high melee, but it's got poor range. And there's like limits on there's mechanics that interact specifically with those 2 attack values. Like there is a trait that I forget what it's called, like Vanguard or something like that. It's basically a taunt, but just for melee attacks. So if you run into an opponent that has a lot of melee-focused units, then that will kind of disrupt them, or it's a defensive measure against them. A cool one I actually saw was there's like a sniper card in one of the Ultramarines decks. And it has like 1 melee attack. It's like 2 energy. I said mana. It's like 2 energy, or 3 energy or something like that. It has 1 melee attack, 4 ranged attack, and I think like 4 health or something like that. And it has like stealth, which means that it can't be targeted until it attacks itself. And a trait called Sniper, which means that if it attacks something, and its attack would kill the target, it will not take damage back. So it literally, the combat rules are like literally the same if you've ever seen Hearthstone, where enemy or two units will exchange damage. They will attack each other when one initiates an attack, and the damage remains. It doesn't heal back. Like I'm pretty sure in Magic it heals back, but it carries over in this game and in Hearthstone. Same rules. So if you have Sniper, it will not. I think it's like a ranged attack specifically. It will not. That card will not die. So basically, everything that has under. And when you target something, the damage that your card takes, it depends on which type of attack you use. So if I'm using my Sniper guy, and I obviously want to attack with my ranged, I'm going to take the target's ranged attack in damage. So if I have the enemy has like a card with 3 ranged attack, that's and like 4 or less health, that's a free. Actually, it doesn't even matter. If the enemy has 4 or less health, what am I even talking? The enemy has 4 or less health, doesn't even matter. I get a free kill, no matter what the attack is. Don't have to take any damage on my Sniper. Wonderful. If I do a melee attack on an opponent that has 3 melee attack, I take 3 damage. Fairly intuitive. And then you just every time you select your card to attack, you just pick which one you want to use. Which I like that. I think that I like that system. I think it opens up a lot of opportunity for like fine-tuning cards. I think you can make some interesting balance decisions for a card around its different strengths in melee and ranged combat. Just like, on the tabletop, they make those same balance decisions. Like, there are certain cards that I saw that had, like, really high melee and, like, 2 ranged attack. So if you attack it if you're going to attack it, obviously you're going to use all your ranged guys, right? And it's funny, it actually almost creates this situation that's, like, analogous to the tabletop, where your opponent has a big enemy, or a big card that has, like, 9 melee and like maybe 2 ranged attack. Now if all of your cards are very like melee focused and they don't have significant ranged attacks, you're going to have to deal really piddly damage to it with just like shooting at it, like you're just shooting at it from a distance, basically, and doing really, really piddly damage. If you want to do big damage, you have to get into melee and risk killing your guys. However, if you have a ranged, like a strong ranged set of, like a set of cards with some strong ranged attack, you can just like pick it off. You can just pick off that big enemy from with your ranged guys, and then never have to engage in melee combat. So it's actually like, I really like it. It not only like, yeah, you can make some interesting dynamics around like deck building. Like there might be certain decks that are really strong ranged wise, and so they lose out to things like that. Or sorry, they win out against things like that, or cards that maybe have like that Vanguard thing, because Vanguard only forces melee attacks on those cards. You can still do like shooting attacks on anything else. It don't matter. There's going to be some interesting interplay, and I actually look forward to seeing. I'm very curious as to like future cards that they design. You can make some neat decisions. Most card games just opt for like one attack stat and one like health stat or defense stat or whatever. And they never really go much further. And so I think it's actually a very neat kind of subtle, actually not really subtle, I can see it having huge implications, innovation that still feels very much, actually makes it feel more like the game, the tabletop game. Big fan. Yada yada. They're really, besides like a couple of these kind of very early impressions of just the things that are in the demo, there's not a whole ton to say. It's clearly like they have enough of a game that they're willing to show it off in a demo, and I think it's pretty good altogether. I think it's neat, and it has a lot of room for expanding. Like when I started Legions, I was like, okay, I just kind of started grasping it. But once I really started to like get a hold of the game and kind of got my bearings and got over that initial big knowledge hump of like, okay, now once I'd figured out most of the mechanics and like what they did and kind of how some of the factions played, it was really cool, and it led to some moments of really fun strategy and like making cool decision making, basically the thing that card games are really good at, just cool decision making moments where you have to decide on like weighing your options and things that you know and things that you don't know, and the higher risk versus the safer option and things like that. Those things are really fun, and when you get to see it and you get to do that in a game that is intensely themed and flavored around a really cool universe that I like, it's really neat. It's just cool. So I am positive impressions. I didn't play too much of it. I haven't been like grinding it or anything. There's nothing to grind, to be perfectly honest. There's nothing to. I played like 3 hours of it, and there's really like I saw pretty much the whole game that is out there. But I came away from it with pretty positive impressions. I like a lot of the new ideas that they're doing, gameplay wise. I think that the up in production value is very appreciated. It feels good. The games that I played online went pretty smoothly. And I'd like to see. There's obviously questions I have, like how are they going to do factions? Are they going to make Ultramarines going to be their own faction, and then like Raven Guard, Raven Wing is why the fuck? Why did they decide that the Dark Angels were going to have like a section called the Raven Wing, and there's another legion called the Raven Guard? Why would you do that? Why stop? It's the same fucking company that made like 2 different legions called the Iron Hands and the Iron Warriors. and they don't even have a lot to do with each other. Or like the World Eaters and the Word Bearers. I always got those confused. Yeah, I'd like to see if they're like are Raven Guard going to be their own like deck or something like that. So that's just like basic stuff that is going to come out the more of the game that they'll show off. I'd like to see what kind of potentially single player content they have, especially at launch. I think that the way they did Legions with the campaigns was cool, and the kind of beginning story that you sort of play through, essentially the tutorial, that stuff was neat. I hope they keep roughly the same monetization model, which was pretty fair from what I've experienced in Legions. Pretty fair. Oh, here's one neat thing. Card descriptions. So there are actually... This is a nice feature. Legions had a lot of, when I was playing it, a lot of mousing over cards and waiting for the little indicator for, like, explainer for what a particular mechanic was, like a keyword mechanic. They would do the same thing that Hearthstone would do, where you mouse over a card, and then whatever keyword mechanics are on it, it will a little box will appear next to the card, just giving a very short explanation. There was a lot of that in Legions, and in Warpforge, you can just I think just right click on the card, and it will just pop up in a little info box on screen. Actually, it'll take up the whole screen. It's not little at all. It'll take up the whole screen, and you can just mouse over literally any... It's a diagram that shows, like, the different parts of the card. Like, this is the ranged attack. This is the melee attack. This is the cost. This is the health. And then you can just mouse over whatever you want, and it will tell you. Cool. I like that a lot. And underneath... this was a little difficult to find... to truly, like, appreciate in game, because turns have like limited time, of course. But underneath, when you like expand the card, essentially underneath them they have little descriptions. I like that a lot. Hearthstone did that in its deck, the deck interface, where you could pull up a card, and there would usually be some kind of because Hearthstone was a very like irreverent, kind of playful take on the Warcraft universe. They would usually have some kind of a description of the card that very often leaned into humor, or like an in-joke or something like that, some kind of just being kind of goofy. This seemed to have been playing it a little more straight, which I don't really mind, but just having the descriptions is nice. I think it's like a real disservice that most 40k games do not have some kind of a codex. Well, I mean, there is the codex. There is the literal Space Marine codex, but you know what I mean, like a data entries, right, that you can read things like Space Marine, the game, which I devoted like almost a whole podcast to talking about. The game Space Marine. I think what would have been really cool in that game is like a little collectible. If they were just going to throw in collectibles because they needed the 2011 replay factor points, having like little codex entries on like who are the Space Marines, who are the Ultramarines specifically, who's the Emperor, what are the Guardsmen, what are the Orcs, what's their deal, what do they do, who are the Chaos guys, what are the demons, what's the Warp. There's like a lot of things. Well, who's the Inquisition? Like there's a lot of things in that game, even though that game is like a very... It does not... You can totally play like Space Marine and not have much of a knowledge of 40k at all, and pretty much just like, okay, I guess that's a thing, your way through the whole game. There's like a lot of stuff that it touches on. It's like it's trying to give you... I think I described it's like a roller coaster. It's like a 40k roller coaster, and there's a lot of stuff that it runs through, and it doesn't really have a lot of time to. You sort of get an idea of like, oh, when the character who's an inquisitor comes up, and they're like, who the fucking Inquisition, you sort of get like how people feel about it, but like you don't really know. Like you sort of get an idea. You can basically grasp the deal with the orcs. You can basically grasp the idea with the chaos and the demons and all that, but you don't really have much context. Obviously, I do, because I know all this shit. But if you're like just a first-time player, you don't really know, because it was definitely also going for a very I think they were shooting for a mass market, as close to mass market as possible with a game like that. Obviously, it was going to cater to 40k fans, but if there was any game that I would say is good to play if you don't know anything about the setting, that's one that was pretty well tailored. Besides, it's extremely, maybe today not so much because of its extremely 7th gen feeling. But yeah, I'm getting sidetracked. What I'm trying to say is that's like a perfect game to have a little collectible category of just little data entries about like, what are all these little things, and you just collect them as they come up in the game, because again, it's a roller coaster. Oh, when you get to in the first little 30% of the game, here's stuff about just introing you to what the Space Marines and the guards are and the orcs, and then when the chaos guys show up, oh, what are all these things, and all that type of thing. There's a whole section where you're like reactivating a Titan. That's like, oh, what's a Titan? That kind of thing. Just find something in the area. Turn on my lamp. It's getting a little dark in here. I wish more 40k games had that, because it is like not even the most perfect series for it. It is maybe the most necessary series for it, because there is a gargantuan behemoth level of lore in 40k. There's fucking like 60 books in the Horus Heresy alone. That's like not even, that's just like one event. Just like one event. There's so much other stuff. And if you're doing a game like that's intimidating, but also one of the strengths of the setting is that it's also very bite-sized in many ways. Like you can just kind of like, if you think something's interesting, you can just kind of skim a wiki page and get a basic idea of what it is, like what their deal is. Just throw in like little wiki articles into your game for whatever happens to come up in the in the story or what have you, and I think that could be neat. Like that could be a cool way to get people interested in the series or whatever, in the franchise. So I'm glad that they're just having like little card descriptions. That stuff's cool. Yada yada. Pretty much my thoughts on Warpforge. Good, positive. I'm looking forward to I just want to see more of it, to be honest. I want to see more of it. I want to see the other factions, the neat ideas that they come up with for them, and where it goes. I am looking forward to it. Also, the demo's free, if you're curious. I mean, it seems pretty natural that a demo would be free, or it seems pretty obvious. But yes, it is. And the game itself will, in all likelihood, also be free. So go have a ball. Check it out.